All right, I want to welcome everybody to this week's class at LaRouche PAC. I'm Susan Kokinda, and we're beginning a three-part series that's going to be presented by Bob Ingram on what is national banking and why is it mandatory for human development. This topic is not at all unrelated to the events that are unfolding in Ukraine right now. Because as we've stressed both in the special strategic update we did yesterday, and I encourage people who are watching this tonight or catching it later to go to the LaRouche PAC website and avail yourself of the very calm, sober discussion of what is actually behind the events that are unfolding this week. But as we've stressed, this is not, the crisis in Ukraine is not the issue of Russia versus Ukraine or of Russia versus the United States and NATO and the West. But rather, what you're seeing is the playing out of the battle of a global imperial elite against, frankly, all the sovereign nations of the world. Russia just happens to be the immediate fish in the barrel. Because whether we're looking at the playing out of what you could call the post-Soviet breakup attempt by the global elite to establish a single power in the world. Some call it the New World Order or world government. It's become more commonly identifiable today as simply a globalist system, what we've identified as the modern day British Empire. Whether you're seeing the, in a sense, the final push by that global empire, which is now being resisted by Russia, or whether you're looking at it from the standpoint of the current Biden administration, in essence, as many commentators besides ourselves have said, begging for this war by their refusal to take Russia's legitimate security concerns under any kind of discussion or diplomatic efforts. In essence, begging for this war because they need a confrontation. They need a war emergency in order to try and maintain their power over a population which is increasingly rejecting the narrative that comes out of Washington, D.C. and comes out of the mainstream media. LaRouche PAC has a team down at the CPAC conference right now. We've got a short video on our website from Keisha Rogers and Mike Stager. And what they report is that despite the bloviating coming from the podium from most of the speakers, the attendees at this conference, of which there are 18,000, are having little of the war propaganda, knowing, as many people have been telling us, that Biden wanted this, and recognizing that this has as much to do with Biden's crumbling domestic support in the United States as it does anything else. But from both of those standpoints, from the global strategic standpoint and from the domestic considerations, it's the same battle. There are two systems before the world. There is an imperial system and there is a system based on sovereign nations. There are two images of man. There is the imperial image of man, which is that we're no more than a beast to be manipulated and culled. And there's the image of man embodied in our Declaration of Independence. And I might add, people should seek out the speech which Tulsi Gabbard, a former Democratic Congresswoman and former Democratic presidential candidate, gave at the Conservative Political Action Committee conference last night, a rather extraordinary appearance in which the centerpiece of her speech was the principles of the Declaration of Independence and the threat that those principles are currently under from Democrats and Republicans alike, who seek to shred our constitutional freedoms. But there are those two images of man, and there are two economic systems based on those two different principles. And those two economic systems have two different banking systems attached to them. The central banking system of private banks and empire, and the national banking system, which is what the subject of the next 3 weeks discussions is going to be, presented by Bob. And this really is fundamental to the overall strategic crisis facing us. People are saying, what can I do about the insanity coming out of Washington, D.C., an insanity which could get us into a direct confrontation with Russia? Because while what Biden is doing is not really a question of doing it from weakness, but rather doing it from the standpoint of trying to create the emergency crisis conditions so that they can somehow hang on to their ever shrinking power. Despite, because you have that kind of administration in there, which often believes its own narrative, we are in a dangerous situation, and there's no question about that. And people ask themselves, what can I do about it? Well, there's really only one thing we can do about it. We have to take the United States back. This is a question of political power. We have to put people who have the interests of this nation, who believe in national sovereignty, who believe in the principles of our founding documents, we have to put them back into power. That means we have to take over the Republican Party and make it once again the party of Abraham Lincoln, the party of working people, both principles of which Donald Trump has asserted his intention to do. So it is a question. We have to take back political power over the course of the coming 2 years, both in terms of the congressional elections and in terms of the presidential election. But that political power has to be accompanied by taking back our economic power. And that is a question of understanding what the principles of national banking are and how they are drastically, completely different, existentially different from the principles of central banking. So that's going to be the subject of our discussion over the course of the next 3 weeks. I think it's perhaps one of the most important discussions that will be taking place in the United States and on the planet, because it is fundamental to the unfolding strategic crisis. So with that, Bob, I turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Susan. Yeah, as Susan said, this is going to be 3 weeks. And I'll just tell you now that next week, the entire discussion is going to be devoted to Alexander Hamilton and to his creation of national banking, or what Lyndon LaRouche would call, or did call, a constitutional sovereign credit system. That will be next week. And then in 2 weeks, the third class, I've entitled it Lyndon LaRouche's Economic Revolution. And I think, as most people know, LaRouche wrote extensively on economics, some of which is very advanced, some of which has been dealt with by Ben Deniston in some of his classes. But what I'm going to focus on are the proposals that LaRouche made, really over a 20 to 30 year time span, on abolishing the Federal Reserve, establishing a national bank, and what it is that LaRouche was proposing actually be done. So that will be the next 2 weeks. The discussion tonight is really in the form of an introduction to this. Because the question of the entire series is the question of national banking. Now, as I think probably almost everyone in this meeting knows, LaRouche PAC has been carrying out a campaign to shut down the Federal Reserve, abolish the Federal Reserve, and we have also talked extensively about the need to rid the world of the oligarchical system of central banking. Now, I'm not going to discuss any of that tonight. We have, some of this will come up again in the next two classes, but it is also the case that we have covered this question of central banking and the Federal Reserve fairly extensively over the last several weeks, with numerous postings on the LaRouche PAC website, both in the form of short articles, of which there have been many, and also, I believe, several videos. All of that material on central banking, the Federal Reserve, etc., all of that material is available on the LaRouche PAC website, and it is easily accessible. So those who are with us tonight, who have not checked that material out, who have not looked into it, who've not read any of the articles, I urge you to do so. But what I want to do tonight, since the subject of this series is not per se getting rid of the Federal Reserve, but rather what we replace it with, the question of national banking. What I want to do tonight is to sort of introduce this, because, on the one hand, national banking poses certain questions in terms of sovereignty over the nations, over the republic's economic affairs, that in fact, constitutionally, the United States should not be run by international the economic policy and the banking policies of the United States should not be run by international financiers, should not be run by any financiers based in London or Wall Street or anywhere else, but that in a sovereign republic, that republic must have sovereign control over banking and credit policy. So there are certain things like that. That really will come more to the fore in the discussion of Hamilton next week. What I want to begin with, though, is really the question is, we're talking about economics, and I want to devote this current discussion to really just sort of looking at some of the basics of what economics really is. I mean, when you talk about economics, what is economics? And of course, the problem we've got in our society is that increasingly, although there's still, quite a number of rational people around who realize that you need to build things, you need to grow food, you need to, have transportation systems, you need factories. But increasingly, when people think about economics, they think about money. And that is just wrong. Fundamentally, money has nothing to do with economics. Money is simply a tool created by the nation, the republic, our Republican government, according to our Constitution, has a monopoly right to issue money, to put it into circulation, to determine how it goes into circulation, and to devise policies such that this money is invested wisely to benefit the nation and to benefit future generations. That's a constitutional credit system. That is what our Constitution defines, and anyone who tells you differently is just not telling the truth. But the question is not just realizing that economics is not about money. It's not a negative. The question is really, in a positive sense, what is economics? When you're talking about economics, what is it you're talking about? And really, you're only talking about one thing, which is the development of the human species. You're talking about progress. You're talking about the increased power of the human species over nature, the mastery of nature, and economic development in a way such that the productivity of the nation increases, the well-being and the happiness of the people increases, and that you are, in fact, creating a more productive future for coming generations. You know, you could call this physical economics, but, you know, I think really a better term in terms of the way I'm going to discuss it tonight is human economics. And really, there is no economics other than human economics. There's no, you know, you go to a school and you study economics and you learn equations and you learn about money flows, you learn about this and that, most of which is gobbledygook. And most of the people who've gotten these degrees in these schools are the ones now running our banks and Federal Reserve, and they've ruined everything. Economics is about the people. It's about human development. It's about human progress. And in fact, it is absolutely correct to say that the only definition of a productive economy, or that the only goal of a political economy, of an economy, is human advancement. That is what you're talking about, human advancement, and devising policies in which that can occur, in which that is the direction you move in. You know, and you know, this is what Lincoln talked about in terms of the right to advance, the freedom to advance. But it's not simply a nice political goal. Yes, you want to create opportunities. You want to create the ability of people to rise to a higher level, to develop new skills. But it's more than just that. It's about that. This is the function of the proper function of a constitutional economic system. It's guided by a mandate, so to speak, of human advancement. If you think about it, you know, there's a lot of discussion right now. I watched this speech by Tulsi Gabbard. I thought it was the best speech I've heard any politician give in this country in the last 10 years, other than the speeches by Donald Trump. And she talked a lot about liberty and freedom. She talked a lot about the Declaration of Independence. But the reality is, and this is not in contrast to what she said, but just to develop what we're talking about here, that there's no freedom, there's no liberty. Liberty is not possible without human advancement. It is only through advancing to higher levels where you're creating new layers of freedom that a republic can actually function. I mean, you have on the one hand the oligarchical system, which is the system of central banking, of money, of usury, of speculation, of thievery. That's the central banking system. That's the system of the Federal Reserve, right? And then you have the American system, the system created by Hamilton, the system taken further by Lincoln, the system which many people contributed to in many ways, which is the system of national banking, of invention, of discovery, of human progress. And that's really the choice here. That's what you're looking at. So in exploring this, one of the questions that's worth asking yourself, if you're saying, okay, human progress, human development, human advancement, okay, I agree with all that, is to ask yourself the question, where does human advancement, where does real economic development come from? Where does it come from? And what I would pose to people, and I think this is coherent with everything I ever read by Lyndon LaRouche, but what I would pose to people is that all human advancement and all real economic development comes from the human imagination. That's the source of all wealth, and I mean, this is what Lincoln talked about, Abraham Lincoln, in terms of discoveries and inventions. But real development, real progress comes from the ability of individual human beings to make discoveries, to think thoughts that have never been thought before, to uncover truths about the universe which have never been understood before, new discoveries. This is accomplished through investigating and unlocking the secrets of the universe, of the universe around us, and in doing so, you're creating new powers for the human species to advance. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about this, but I do want to interject right here that this should be the focus of all economic policy. Not just building factories, we need factories. Not just building nuclear power plants, we need a lot of nuclear power plants. But one of the primary goals of economic policy should be to spark the imagination, particularly among young people, to spark the imagination of American citizens to make new discoveries, to make new contributions. And this raises the question of our school systems and education. Now, I mean, look, I don't know the average age of the people who are in this meeting tonight. Maybe some of them are still quite young. There are probably a number of us on here who are no longer quite young. But, it's not that difficult to remember, to bring back into your memory some of what it was like to be a very young person. And, as you might recall, when you're an adolescent, when you're in high school, when you're a young adult, it's a very real question. What am I going to do with my life? Who am I? Where do I fit in to society, right? Now, if you look at what's done in the schools today, with the National Educational Association, with these, politicians and these horrible people on some of these school boards, I mean, they tell children, well, the biggest decision in your life is to decide what sex you want to be. Or maybe the biggest decision in your life is to decide what kind of drug you want to take. Or maybe the biggest decision in your life is to decide how you're going to make the most money with the least amount of effort, right? So these are sort of the things that are put upon our 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17-year-old young people as the major decisions that they have to make in their life. I mean, I don't think I have to tell anybody. This is criminal. This is menticide. People should go to prison for doing this. Because what we should be doing with our young people is we should recognize in them that they're the next generation. They're the generation which is going to have to discover how the human species is going to exist on Mars, how we are going to become an interplanetary species, how are we going to develop our own economy, how are we going to create something like fusion energy, how are we going to create a better, more productive, more powerful future for coming generations. And the people who are in school now are the people who are going to have to meet those challenges. So we should be doing everything we can to spark their imagination, to intrigue them with with the most profound ideas of science, of culture, right? And I would argue to you that that's economics. That's an economic policy, because economics is always about creating something new, creating something better. And when we get into discuss Alexander Hamilton next week and his report on manufacturers, I think some of this will become very clear. But this is what we're looking to do, to trigger the imagination of our youth. Now, this may seem like a strange discussion about national banking, but I'm going to continue down this road anyway. I want to talk about a couple of examples of imagination, creativity, this whole question of really what the nature of the human species is. Because see, what Hamilton did, and it's profoundly genius what he did, is he invented a national credit system which is coherent with the creative nature of the human identity, the human mind. Because credit, properly used, is you're creating something. You're creating something new. You're creating something more productive, more powerful, which is going to unleash new possibilities. And that's what Hamilton did. And the truth of the matter is that this is what has defined all progress, not a national banking system, but this question of creativity. This is what has defined all human progress since the earliest records of the human species, going back as far as we know. LaRouche would often refer to this question of the human discovery of fire. And the discovery of fire, how to make fire, how to utilize fire, first for cooking food, for heat and what have you, later the use of fire to create pottery, then the use of fire to develop metallurgy, the production of bronze, which is a man-made, thing. Bronze doesn't exist in nature. It was created through the use of fire and the combination of fire with metal. Man harnessing the use of fire, the human species harnessing the use of fire, this goes back probably to the earliest appearance of the human species. It has been conclusively documented that mankind harnessed the use of fire as at least 1.5 million years ago. And it probably goes back earlier than that. There have been remains of this found in Africa. There have also been remains going back to almost that far, I think 1.3 million years ago in what's now Israel. But this goes all the way back to the beginnings of the human species. So from the very beginning, man, the human species, has been creative, has distinguished itself from all other creatures. Now, what I want to do here is just present you with a couple of examples of this question of, going back into history a little bit with this question of discovery, this question of imagination. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read a very short excerpt from Homer, from the Odyssey, from Book 5. And I'll probably butcher it, but I'm going to read it anyway. It's not long. And, people know the Odyssey. You have Odysseus sailing around, trying to find his way home. But this is from Book 5, and it goes as follows. His sails exposed and hoisted, off he got, and cheerful was he. At the stern, he's sitting in the boat. At the stern he sat, and steered right artfully, nor sleep could seize his eyelids. He beheld the Pleiades, the bear, surnamed the Wain, that round doth move about Orion, and keeps still above the billowy ocean. The slow-setting star Bootes, called by some the Wagoner. Calypso warned him he his course should steer still to his left hand. Okay, now that probably didn't mean hardly anything to anyone, and I understand that. But I read it for a particular reason, which is what Homer is describing here is navigation over open water by the stars. In this short little section that I read you, he names 4 different constellations or asterisms. An asterism, I think, is like a small constellation. I don't know. I'm not an astronomer. But he names 4 constellations. The Pleiades, the Bear, that's Ursa Major, Orion, and Bootes. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Someone can correct me. And he's describing how he should steer still to his left hand, how he should steer right artfully. Sees one constellation, steers one way. Sees another constellation, steers another way. And he's describing the use of astronomy to navigate over the open seas. Right? That's what he's doing there. Now, that's remarkable. And I don't know if everyone who's listening understands how remarkable that is. How human beings, our species, we the people, how we are the only ones who can unlock the secrets of the constellations, unlock their relationship to distance, to time, to longitude, latitude, etc., without going into all of this, and determine how to steer where there's nothing in sight, water, 360 degrees around you. What a phenomenal human discovery that is, right? This is how all progress has been made. if you go back and, to, well, I'll take this a little out of order. If you go back to, bear with me one second, because I'm taking it out of order. Well, I can't find it. But if you go back to the late Paleolithic era, say 50,000 BC, 100,000 BC, these are prehistoric because this is before any evidence of written writing. There might have been writing, but there's no evidence of it. But you go back to that era, right? The late Paleolithic, I mean, you have mining, you have the beginnings of metallurgy, you have the beginnings of agriculture. You have navigation over open water. You have discoveries being made. You have the discovery of charcoal. You have the discovery of many kinds of things. You have the invention of pottery. None of this had anything to do with a central banking system or with money. I mean, I'm sure they had some means by which they traded, but the advances that were made were all made through this process of human discovery, of human invention. Now, what I want to do now is, can you put up those, the first of those slides, Susan? Yeah, I want to show you 4 slides, just quickly, one after the other. These are all from Leonardo da Vinci. I'm not going to say a lot about any of them except for the last one, but this is a slide of a grinding machine which Leonardo designed to grind lenses, right? Convex and concave lenses, and the purpose of this was part of Leonardo's overall design, which there's another picture of I'm not going to show you, to build a telescope to look into the heavens, to begin to uncover, to discover the mysteries of the heavens, to be able to study the stars and the moon. And Leonardo actually designed, I don't think he ever built it. If it did, it didn't survive. But he designed the first telescope, astronomical telescope. There were looking glasses and things like that. But he designed the first astronomical telescope more than 100 years before Galileo was using his telescope or anyone else was using their telescope. And this was a machine he designed to grind the lenses for the telescope. You want to put up the next slide? And this is a drawing from his notebooks of a hot air balloon, which he also, I should tell you, for people who've not looked at Leonardo's notebooks, what have you, these pictures are accompanied by columns and sometimes pages of script, of handwriting, and other little drawings in which he goes into sometimes quite a bit of detail of how these things should be built. So these are not just flights of fancy. He's actually designing these things. And this is a picture of his proposal for a hot air balloon. And this is, I believe, more than 200 years before the first hot air balloon was built. I could be wrong about that, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. So this is another product of the imagination of Leonardo da Vinci. You want to put up the next one? And this is one of his several pictures for a glider, for essentially an airplane, but not a powered plane, but for a glider. And I'm not going to say much about it, but obviously this is long before the first glider was built. And it wasn't just that, he came up with these, you know, strange ideas. I mean, he was studying air currents and what have you, and writing about what it would take to keep something like this, like what you're looking at, to keep it afloat, you know, to actually make it something that could be used and would glide through the air. So that's another example of this, and then the last one, and this is very interesting. This is what is called the Da Vinci globe, or it's also known as the ostrich egg globe. And this is actually what you're looking at is the globe, the actual globe, a photograph of the actual globe that Leonardo constructed. It still exists. It was rediscovered by a man named Stefan Messine, who not only rediscovered it, but conclusively demonstrated that it had been built by Leonardo. It's called the ostrich egg globe because what they did, well, you can't see me pointing at it. You'll see there's sort of a seam, a horizontal seam running across it in the middle. Yeah. He took an ostrich egg, which is more oblong, and removed the middle part and put the top of the ostrich egg back on top of the bottom of the ostrich egg to make like a globe or something close to a globe. And then I believe he painted on it. I'm not sure if that's painting or I don't really know what kind of medium he used to create this globe. This is the first globe ever created, which shows the New World. This is South America you're looking at there. And this globe was created by Leonardo in 1504, only 12 years after Columbus discovered America, sailed to America. And actually, how this came about is that between 1501 and 1502, America Vespucci wrote a series of letters, long letters, which he sent back to Florence, describing his exploration of, in particular, South America, and giving the longitude and the latitude and describing where they had sailed. And these letters went back to Florence. They were read publicly. They were circulated all over the place. And it is very clear. I don't have any proof of this, but there's just no other way it could have happened. It's very clear that this globe was created by Leonardo based on the information that Americo Vespucci has sent back to Florence in 1501 or 1502. The letters arrived in Florence in 1501, 1502. The globe was made in 1504. And Vespucci, in two of his voyages, had explored the coast of South America, where he had, and described these voyages in great detail in his letters. And no one else had done that. So the information that Leonardo had used could not have come from anywhere other than from these letters. But it's hard to see. But in the he labels Leonardo on this drawing, he labels South America as Mundus Novus, which is the New World. And this is the first globe ever created, depicting the New World. You know, I wanted to put this up. You could take it off now, Susan. I wanted to put this up because, I'm trying to get this to sink in as best as I can, of the magnificence of this power of discovery, this power of imagination, and how this has been the driving force. Not that it's driving us, because it's coming from within us to drive forward all human progress. You have new concepts, new ideas, which are formulated within the human mind. Concepts which are entirely new. And then they're tested. There's a hypothesis, and the hypothesis is tested. And then if the hypothesis is proven to be true, to be truthful, it's socialized with other people throughout society, and new inventions are created. And in the case of science, new technologies are created. And you're driving forward human society willfully through this process. This is the basis for all wealth, for all human progress. This is what national banking is about. This is what a sovereign credit system is about. And it's really about the relationship between the human individual and human culture and the universe around us. Because, look, let me take a step back. One of the differences between the human species and all other creatures is that all other creatures, animal, vegetable, insects, birds, your pet dog, well, actually, that's not entirely true with dogs anymore, but all other creatures live within nature. I mean, people have heard of extinction events, right? That there have been cataclysms in the past in which thousands, tens of thousands of species have gone extinct, have been wiped out. Why is that? It's because all other creatures are dependent on nature for food, for water, for climate, for the environment they live in. They're dependent on nature. They live within nature. But we don't. The history of the human species is the history of man's increasing mastery over nature, of creating a human-directed biosphere. And that, in fact, is our relationship with the universe as a whole. We're unlocking secrets of the universe. We're using these discoveries to increase our knowledge of the universe and to increase our power, our creative power in the universe, to change that universe, just as we're changing the planet Earth. That's what it means to be human. That's what economic development is really all about. So the I hope this is coherent. That's all I could say. So the I'm going to end with another quote. This is from Aeschylus. Oh, and then I do want to end. I want to say one more thing after that, to sort of bring it back to central banking or national banking. But this is a quote from Aeschylus, I believe from Prometheus Bound. It certainly looks like it is. But this is a short thing where Prometheus is speaking, right? So these are words being uttered by Prometheus. And he says, "But of wretched mortals, Zeus took no notice, desiring to bring the whole race to an end and create a new one in its place. Against this purpose, none dared make stand except me. I only had the courage. I saved mortals so that they not descend, blasted utterly, to the house of Hades." And as people know, Prometheus is the fire bringer. In Greek mythology, Prometheus is the fire bringer. Prometheus, in bringing mankind fire, brought him the spark of reason, the creativity to develop, to prosper, to progress. This is the difference. Prometheus and Zeus, the central bankers, the oligarchy, who want to crush us. We are the Prometheans. We are the fire bringers. We have to unleash a new scientific and technological revolution, which is going to uplift our own nation, our own people, and the rest of the humanity as well. So the final thing I just want to do is I want to direct people's attention as part of this campaign on ending the Fed and restoring national banking. I want to direct people's attention to a video that was posted on the LaRouche PAC website recently, and I believe it is still on the front page of the LaRouche PAC website, entitled "We Are the Firebringers." And it's an excerpt from a speech given in 2009 by Lyndon LaRouche. And it is a terrific video, and well worth your time to watch it. But I just would emphasize that in that video, in speaking about these oligarchs, these despicable individuals and institutions, this central banking system, I mean, LaRouche is just emphatic. He says, we don't need Wall Street. It's a swindle. He says, cancel the debt, cancel it, and create a constitutional banking system, a constitutional credit system in which we can begin the process of rebuilding our nation, creating opportunities, and creating a society in which we can live like human beings and all that that means. So that's what I have to say tonight, folks. So we'll just end it right there.